H1, human-made tea for sick cub. Entire fleet shows up with pretend symptoms for a cup. HR. The warship, Endless Horizon, was a big, cold metal place. It moved slowly through the dark space near the Kelos Nebula, where stars burned far away like dying fires. The ship was full of Varric soldiers, tall, silver-furred aliens, with 4 eyes and wide shoulders. They were strong. They were serious. They had fought wars across 3 galaxies and never lost a battle. The hallways of their ship smelled like iron and engine smoke, and the lights were always dim because Varric eyes worked better in low light. Dohun did not have 4 eyes. He had 2. He also needed more light to read, kept bumping into door frames built for taller beings, and made the Varric crew uncomfortable by smiling at them every morning. He was a human, the only human on the ship. He had been placed there as part of an exchange program between the Galactic Council and the Varric fleet, a program that most Varric officers still did not fully understand or agree with, but followed because their admiral had signed the paper. Dohyun was not a soldier. He was listed as a cultural liaison officer, which mostly meant he sat in meetings, translated things badly, and tried very hard not to get in anyone's way. He was 29 years old, from a city called Busan, on a small planet called Earth, and he had brought 3 bags with him onto the ship. 1 had clothes, 1 had books and a small music player. The 3rd had food from home, dried seaweed, a few snack packets, 2 tins of tea, and a small jar of honey that his grandmother had given him the morning he left. She had held his face in both hands at the departure gate and told him, in Korean, that no matter where he went in the universe, a warm cup of tea would always make things better. He had smiled and nodded the way people do when they love someone and do not want to argue. He had not really believed her. He believed her now. It started on a Tuesday, or what Dohun counted as Tuesday, since the Varric did not use the same calendar. He was walking back to his small room after eating a meal alone in the galley, when he heard a sound from down the hall. It was soft, not a mechanical sound, not the usual hum of the engines. It was a quiet, high whimpering, the kind of sound that made something in Dohun's chest pull tight. He stopped. He listened. He followed it. At the end of the corridor, in a small side room used mostly for storage, he found Ruka. The cub was small, even by Varric standards, barely 2 cycles old, which was roughly equal to a young child in human years. His silver fur had gone pale and patchy. His 4 eyes were half-closed and watery. His 2 tails, which usually flicked around with energy, were lying flat on the floor beneath him. He was curled up on a folded blanket between 2 crates, shaking slightly, and making that soft, sad sound every few seconds. Dohyun crouched down slowly, so he wouldn't startle him. Ruka looked up. His 4 eyes blinked one at a time, which was something Varric cubs did when they were scared or confused. He stared at the human. The human stared back. "Hey," Dohyun said quietly. "You don't feel good, huh?" Ruka made a small sound that was not quite a word. Varric cubs did not speak much in their early cycles. They communicated mostly through sounds and tail movement. Right now, the tail was not moving at all. Dohyun stayed crouched there for a moment. He thought about going to find a medic. He had already seen the ship's medics earlier that week. 3 serious Varric doctors, who used instruments the size of small shovels, and spoke about illness in very long, technical words. They had already seen Ruka. He had overheard them in the corridor, saying the cub's illness was not dangerous, just persistent and uncomfortable, and that rest was the best they could offer. The Varric did not have much in the way of comfort medicine. Their medical philosophy was mostly, fix the damage, then wait. Dohyun stood up. He walked to the galley. He filled the small kettle with water and set it to heat. Then he opened his 3rd bag, moved aside the dried seaweed, and pulled out one of the tins. It was green tea, a simple blend, the kind his grandmother bought from a small shop near the harbor. The tin had a picture of a mountain on it, and some writing in Korean that said something about morning calm. He let the water come to just the right temperature. His grandmother had always said boiling water made green tea bitter. He poured it carefully over the leaves in a small cup, one of the plain ones from the galley shelf. He watched it turn pale gold. Then he opened the honey jar and added 1 small spoon, stirred it gently, and waited for it to cool just enough. When he came back to the storage room, Ruka had not moved. He was still curled up between the crates, still shaking a little. He looked up at Do-hyun again when he entered, with that same slow blinking. Do-hyun sat down on the floor next to him. He held the cup close so the steam could reach the cub first. Ruka's small nose twitched. His ears, which had been flat against his head, lifted slightly. He sniffed once, then twice. His eyes opened a little more. Do-hyun tilted the cup gently. "Try it," he said. Not as a command, just as an offer. Ruka leaned forward slowly. He sniffed the cup for a long time. Then, carefully, he took a small sip. Something in his small face shifted. The tension around his eyes loosened just slightly. He took another sip. Then he sat back and was quiet for a moment. And then he made a new sound. Lower, steadier, something that had no translation, but felt, to Do-hyun, like the word, "oh." Do-hyun sat with him while he finished the cup. He did not talk much. He just stayed there on the cold floor, in the dim light, while the cub drank and the ship hummed around them. An hour later, Ruka was asleep. His breathing had slowed. The shaking had stopped. His fur still looked pale, but his tails had curled loosely around his small body in the way that meant comfortable. Do-hyun had learned this in week 2 of the exchange program from a cultural pamphlet. Do-hyun picked up the empty cup. He looked at the sleeping cub for a moment. Then he turned off the overhead light, left the smaller side lamp on, and walked back down the corridor to his room. He had made tea. The cub had felt better. That was all. The next morning, the ship felt different. Not in any way Do-hyun could measure. The engines still hummed at the same frequency. The lights were still dim. The Varric crew still walked the corridors in perfect silence, their boots hitting the metal floor in that heavy, even way that always reminded Do-hyun of slow drums. Nothing had changed on the surface, but something was different underneath. He noticed it first at breakfast. The galley was never a warm place. The Varric did not treat meals as social events. They ate quickly, in silence, and left. Do-hyun had gotten used to eating alone with his music player in his ear, watching the stars through the small porthole window. But that morning, when he sat down with his food, he realized 2 crew members at the far end of the table were looking at him. Not in the usual suspicious way. Curious. He glanced up. They looked away immediately. Their ears went flat, which he had learned meant embarrassed. He thought nothing of it and ate his breakfast. Later that day, he passed Commander Yura in the corridor near the navigation bay. She was a tall Varric female. Serious face, sharp eyes, decorated uniform with several silver pins that meant she had done impressive things in battles Do-hyun could not pronounce. She had spoken to him exactly 4 times since he boarded the ship, and all 4 times it had been to tell him he was standing in the wrong place. This time, she stopped. Do-hyun stopped too, instinctively, because when Commander Yura stopped, everyone stopped. She looked at him for a moment. Her 4 eyes moved in that way Varric eyes did when they were thinking. 2 focusing forward, 2 shifting slightly to the side. Then she said, very formally, "The cub rested well." But it was also not just a statement. There was something underneath it. "Good," Do-hyun said. "The tea helps with that. Warmth and honey mostly." Yura's left ear twitched, just once. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked away. That was the whole conversation, but by the end of the day, Do-hyun had the strange feeling that it had traveled further than just the two of them. He found out how far that evening. He was in the small common room that the exchange program had given him access to. A narrow room with a bench, a screen on the wall, and a plant that was slowly dying despite his best efforts. He was reading when his door-comm chimed. He opened it to find Senior Officer Gorham standing in the hallway. Gorham was one of the oldest crew members on the ship. He had gray mixed into his silver fur, and a long scar across his chin from something nobody talked about. He was not someone who knocked on the door of the human liaison officer for casual visits. He was holding a small datapad. "I have been asked," Gorham said, in a voice that made everything sound like a military briefing, "to collect information about the substance you gave the Admiral's nephew." Do-hyun blinked. "Ruka is the Admiral's nephew?" Gorham stared at him. "You did not know this?" "No one told me," Do-hyun replied. There was a pause. Gorham's expression did not change, but something around his eyes shifted slightly. "The Admiral's sister's cub," he said. "He is aboard because the Admiral keeps family close during long deployments." Do-hyun absorbed this quietly. He had just given honey tea to the Fleet Admiral's nephew without knowing it. He was not sure if that was good or bad, and Gorham's face was not helping him figure it out. "What would you like to know about the tea?" Do-hyun asked carefully. He had clearly written down questions. This was somehow both very funny and very touching. The substance, its origin, its composition, its method of preparation, its purpose. Do-hyun explained. He kept it simple. Tea was a plant. Humans dried the leaves. They put them in hot water. The water took the good things from the leaves. Then they drank it. Different kinds did different things. Some helped with sleep, some with stomach problems, some just with feeling better in a general way. Green tea had things in it that were calming. Honey had sugar and a few other things that helped with soreness and energy. Gorham wrote all of this down very seriously, as though Do-hyun were describing a new weapons system. "And the process," Gorham said. "You performed it yourself. You did not ask the medical team." "It's not really a medical thing," Do-hyun said. "I mean, it has some medical benefits, but mostly, it's just something you do for someone when they're not feeling well. It's more about care than cure." Gorham looked up from his pad. His 4 eyes all focused forward at once, which Do-hyun had learned meant full attention. "Explain that," he said. Do-hyun thought about it. "When someone is sick," he said slowly, "medicine fixes the problem. But sometimes the problem isn't the only hard thing. Being sick is lonely. It's uncomfortable. It makes you feel small. So you make someone something warm, and you sit with them, and it doesn't fix the illness, but it fixes the feeling of being alone with it. That matters too." Gorham was quiet for a long time. He looked at his datapad. He looked back at Do-hyun. He wrote something down. Then he said, "I see," in the tone of someone who had just understood something they had not expected to find interesting. He left after that, walking back down the corridor with his usual heavy step. But Do-hyun noticed he walked more slowly than usual, the way people do when they are thinking hard about something. That night, Do-hyun heard through his door the distant sound of Varric voices, low, rumbling, speaking quickly in their own language. He could not understand all of it, but he heard one word repeated several times that he did know, because it appeared in the cultural pamphlet under the section about family. The word meant warmth given without being asked. The Varric had a specific word for that, just the one. It was considered important enough to name. Do-hyun lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. He thought about her small kitchen with the yellow curtains, and the way she always had the kettle on before you even said you were cold. He fell asleep to the sound of the ship humming and the stars moving slowly past his window. And somewhere at the back of his mind, a small thing had begun that he would not understand for several more days. It started with Ensign Pela. He appeared at Do-hyun's door on the third morning, standing very straight, in the way all Varric soldiers stood, with his hands behind his back and his chin lifted. He was young, probably the youngest crew member on the ship after Ruka, and his silver fur was still slightly soft at the edges, the way it was in younger Varric, before it went fully smooth. He had a serious face and very large eyes that made him look permanently surprised. "I have a sore throat," Pela said. Do-hyun looked at him. He did not look like he had a sore throat. His voice was clear. He was standing at perfect posture. But he had knocked on the door and said the words, and something about the way he said them, very carefully, like he had practiced, made Do-hyun press his lips together to keep from smiling. "Come in," Do-hyun said. He pulled out the kettle. Pela stepped inside and stood in the middle of the room, looking around with great interest, but trying very hard to look like he was not looking around with great interest. His eyes moved from the books on the shelf, to the dying plant in the corner, to the small framed photo on the wall. Do-hyun's family at a beach, everyone squinting into the sun. Do-hyun made the tea, green, same as before, 1 spoon of honey. He let it cool slightly. Then he handed it to Pela. Pela took the cup in both hands. He had only 4 fingers on each hand, all quite long, and the cup looked small in them. Then he lifted it and sniffed, the way Ruka had done, that careful, deliberate sniffing that Varric did when they were experiencing something new. His ears lifted slightly. He took a sip. Then he stood completely still for a moment, in a way that was hard to describe. It was not dramatic. It was more like the way a room goes quiet when a window closes and the wind stops. Something inside him had settled. "It is warm," Pela said. "Yes," said Do-hyun, "even in the throat." "That's the point." Pela took another sip. He turned slightly toward the porthole window and looked at the stars. For a minute, neither of them spoke. The ship hummed. The tea cooled slowly. Outside, the nebula drifted past in long, quiet colors. "My unit leader drinks something like this," Pela said eventually, still looking at the window. "Not this, but something warm, in the mornings, before duty starts." "I thought it was only a personal habit." "A lot of humans drink it," Do-hyun said. "Almost every culture on Earth has some version of it. Hot water, some kind of plant, sometimes milk or honey or spices. Different everywhere, but the idea is the same." "What is the idea?" Pela asked. Do-hyun thought for a second. "Starting the day gently," he said, "or ending it gently. Something to hold while things are hard." Pela nodded slowly. He finished the cup. He set it down on the small table very carefully, as though it were heavier than it looked. Then he straightened back to full posture and said, formally, "Thank you. My throat is better." "Good," said Do-hyun with a completely straight face. Pela left. He came back the next morning. "My throat is worse again," he said. "Come in," said Do-hyun. He made the tea. They sat in silence again, and Pela looked at the stars again, and Do-hyun let the kettle warm the small room. And no one said anything about the fact that Pela's voice sounded perfectly clear, and had sounded perfectly clear both days. That afternoon, Weapons Officer Toka arrived. She was stockier than Pela, with darker fur and a no-nonsense expression that reminded Do-hyun vaguely of his aunt, who had worked in a shipping yard for 30 years, and had very little patience for things that wasted her time. Toka did not waste time. She appeared at the door, looked at Do-hyun, and said simply, pressure behind the eyes, "I was told you could help." "Who told you?" Do-hyun asked. "Pela," she said. "Of course." He made the tea. Toka did not look at the stars. She sat on the edge of the bench, with her hands on her knees, and watched the process with focused attention. The boiling water, the leaves steeping, the honey dissolving. She watched like someone memorizing steps for a report. When he handed her the cup, She received it with both hands in the same way Pela had, and drank it in short, even sips. And her expression did not change much, except around the eyes, where the lines softened just slightly. When she finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "Pela said you sat with the cub." "I did," Do-hyun said. "The whole time. Until he slept." Toka looked at her empty cup. "Our medical team does not sit," she said. It was not a criticism, just a fact. That is the protocol. "Humans do it differently," Do-hyun said. "Not better, just differently. We think being present helps." Toka turned the cup slowly in her hands. "The cub is the Admiral's nephew," she said. "So I've been told. The Admiral does not show it, but he is very attached to that cub." She paused. "We all are, a little. He was born during a hard campaign. He has been on this ship his whole life. He is—" She stopped, looked at the window briefly. "He is ours," she said finally. The word she used in Varick was not quite ours, it was wider than that. It meant something closer to one we carry. Do-hyun nodded. He understood that. "Then I'm glad he felt better," he said. Toka nodded once, put the cup down, and stood. At the door she paused. "The pressure behind my eyes is gone," she said. "Good," said Do-hyun. He listened to her footsteps, going down the corridor. Heavy, even, regular. And then he put the kettle back on, because something told him he would need it again soon. He was right. By late afternoon, 3 junior crew members appeared at his door together. They stood in a small cluster in the hallway, each pointing at a different part of themselves. One at his chest, one at the back of her neck, one at his lower arm, for reasons that were genuinely unclear. Do-hyun looked at the 3 of them. They looked at him. He opened the door wider and said, "I only have 2 cups, so someone will have to wait." All 3 of them stepped inside immediately and arranged themselves carefully in the small room, politely not touching anything and very politely pretending they were not looking at everything. Human-made tea for sick cub. Entire fleet shows up with pretend symptoms for a cup. By the 5th day, the line outside Do-hyun's room extended halfway down the corridor. He stood in his doorway in the morning and looked at it. About a dozen Varick soldiers, standing in a neat, single-file line against the wall, all facing forward, all in full uniform, all holding themselves with the perfect posture of people who had never once slouched in their lives. They were very still, very quiet. They looked like they were waiting for a military inspection. Do-hyun looked at the line. The line did not look back. They all stared straight ahead with great dignity. He rubbed his face. He went to the galley and brought back his kettle, both his cups, a large bowl he borrowed from the kitchen shelf, and 3 small plates. He set everything up on the table in his room and called the first one in. She was a communications officer, tall even for a Varick, with neat fur and very precise movement. She said she had a ringing in her right ear. Do-hyun made tea. She sat with it for a while, looking at the dying plant in the corner, with an expression that was almost gentle. Before she left, she told him the plant needed more light and less water, and that the soil looked wrong. Do-hyun wrote this down. The ear ringing, she confirmed, was gone. After Bori came a security officer named Kiro, who reported tightness in the shoulders. After Kiro came a navigator called Sona, who described a vague discomfort she placed somewhere in the middle of her chest, but admitted, after a short pause, that she could not be more specific. After Sona came 2 engineers together who had both independently developed what they called heaviness behind the forehead. Each of them came in. Do-hyun made tea. They sat. They were quiet for a while. Something loosened in them the way it does when a person has been holding tension they didn't know they were holding. They left calmer than they arrived, and every single one of them reported at the door that their symptom was improved. Word reached the other ships on the 6th day. The Varek Ninth Fleet was 4 ships traveling in formation: the Endless Horizon, the Iron Meridian, the Starfall Crest, and the Pale Compass. They flew close enough that crew communicated regularly by short-range signal. Apparently, they had been communicating about the tea. Do-hyun found this out when his door comm chimed in the early morning, and he opened it to find Senior Officer Gorham, who was holding his datapad again, and looking both formal and slightly uncomfortable in the way people look when they are delivering news they find personally embarrassing. "There have been requests," Gorham said. Do-hyun waited. "From the other ships," Gorham continued. "Several crew members aboard the Iron Meridian and the Starfall Crest have reported symptoms and have asked whether the human liaison officer might be available for consultation." "How many crew members?" Do-hyun asked. Gorham looked at his pad. 43, he said. Do-hyun stared at him. "As of this morning," Gorham added. "Gorham," Do-hyun said carefully, "the other ships are not docked with this one. The crew members on those ships cannot physically come to my door." "No," Gorham agreed. "Commander Yura has suggested a solution. She proposes a short docking window so that crew rotations can occur, during which interested parties may—" He paused, choosing words carefully— "seek consultation." Do-hyun sat down on the edge of his bench. "A docking window for tea." "For medical purposes," Gorham said, with great firmness. Do-hyun pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. Then he took a breath. "How much tea do I have left?" "We have already checked. The ship's supply database does not carry the substance. However, one of our engineers believes he can synthesize an approximate blend using available organic compounds, if you provide the base specifications." Do-hyun looked up. "Your engineer wants to synthesize tea?" "For medical purposes," Gorham said again. He gave Gorham the specifications: leaf type, water temperature, steeping time, the ratio of honey. Gorham wrote everything down with the same focused precision he probably used to write weapons maintenance reports. 2 hours later, things got genuinely complicated. His comm unit buzzed with a direct signal, not from the ship's internal line, but from the Fleet Command Channel. Do-hyun had never received a signal on the Fleet Command Channel before. He was not entirely sure he was supposed to be able to. He answered it. The face that appeared on the small screen was one he had seen in the official briefing files during his first week. The face belonged to Admiral Sorvin. He was older than most of the crew, with gray running through his silver fur and deep-set eyes that had the weight of someone who had made hard decisions for a very long time. He wore his full admiral's uniform with all its decorations, which on a Varek meant quite a lot of metal attached to fabric. He looked at Do-hyun. Do-hyun looked at him. "I have been made aware," Admiral Sorvin said, in a slow and deliberate voice, "of the situation." "Yes, sir," said Do-hyun. "I have also developed," Sorvin said, pausing, "a mild tightness in the upper chest region." There was a silence. "I see," Do-hyun said. His voice was completely steady, which he was quite proud of. "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is," Sorvin said. "I am told the consultation involves a warm substance." "Yes, sir. It's called tea. It's made from dried plant leaves and hot water. I usually add honey." Sorvin's ear tilted slightly. Just one ear, the left one. "And this helps?" "Many people find it helps, yes." Another pause. Sorvin looked just to the side of the screen for a moment, as though checking that no one was listening. Then he looked back and said with complete dignity, "I would like to arrange a consultation." "Of course," Do-hyun said. "We can do that during the docking window." Sorvin nodded. "I will also—" He stopped briefly. "I will also bring my assistant, Officer Nara. She has reported a similar tightness." "Both of you are welcome," Do-hyun said. Sorvin nodded again, once, formally. Then he cut the signal. Do-hyun set the comm unit down. He sat very still for a moment, looking at the wall. The fleet admiral of the Varric Ninth Fleet had just asked him for tea. He opened his supply bag, took out the second tin, the jasmine blend, the one he had been saving, and set it on the table next to the first. He was going to need both. He was going to need the big bowl and all the cups he could find, and possibly a second kettle. He was going to need to spend the next day sitting with a fleet of alien soldiers, making hot drinks and listening to made-up symptoms. Because something small and quiet had moved through 4 warships, like a current through still water. He went to find the galley's biggest pot. From the storage room at the end of the hall, he could hear Ruka, fully recovered now, loud and lively, chasing something small and mechanical across the floor with happy sounds. The cub had no idea what he had started. He was just playing. Dohun smiled, picked up the pot, and went to work. Human-made tea for sick cub. Entire fleet shows up with pretend symptoms for a cup. The docking window lasted 2 days. It was officially called a routine formation maintenance halt. The paperwork filed with the Galactic Council described technical synchronization checks and fuel distribution reviews. Dohyun read the summary report out of curiosity, and found it impressively detailed and entirely made of words that meant nothing in particular. Gorham had written it, and Gorham was, it turned out, a very good writer of official documents. The actual reason was tea. Crew members came in small groups from the Iron Meridian and the Starfall Crest and the Pale Compass, each presenting themselves at the door of the human small room with a symptom prepared in advance. A clicking in the jaw, a pulling sensation near the left shoulder, a recurring tightness that arrived conveniently around the time the docking window was announced. One officer from the Pale Compass had apparently put considerable thought into her symptom. She described it as a diffuse inner heaviness that was not painful, but was, she said with great feeling, present. Dohyun made tea for all of them. He had moved operations to the main galley by the second day, because his room no longer fit the traffic. Gorham's engineer had successfully produced a workable tea blend from ship stores. Not perfect, Dohyun noted, a bit more bitter than he would have liked, but acceptable, and they had enough for everyone. Dohyun stood at the counter with his kettle, making cup after cup, and crew members came through in small groups and sat at the long galley tables. And for the first time since Dohyun had boarded the ship, the galley was loud. Not in a noisy way. It was a low, rumbling sound. Varric voices speaking in the relaxed register they used off-duty, which Dohyun had barely heard before. They talked among themselves while they waited for their tea and while they drank it. He caught pieces he could understand. Stories about home, about their families, about things that had happened a long time ago, about cubs of their own, parents, siblings, someone they had not seen since the last deployment. He realized, standing there with his kettle, that the tea had not just given them a reason to come, it had given them a reason to stop. The Varec were extraordinary soldiers. They were focused, disciplined, efficient. They did not stop easily, and on a warship moving through active territory, stopping felt uncomfortably close to weakness. But a medical consultation, that was necessary. That was allowed. You could stop for that, without explanation. So, they stopped. And once they stopped, and were given something warm, and asked no questions, and expected nothing, they talked, quietly, at the long tables, over cups of not quite right but warm enough tea. 4 ships' worth of crew members talked to each other in ways they probably hadn't in months. Admiral Sorvin arrived on the second afternoon. He came without announcement, which surprised the door crew, and without most of his usual escort, which surprised everyone else. He walked into the galley with Officer Nara at his side. She was small and precise, with quick bright eyes, and the look of someone who noticed everything, and the galley went immediately quiet. Every soldier present came to attention. The sound of cups being set down quickly on tables happened all at once. Sorvin raised one hand. "As you were," he said. They settled, though not entirely. because it is very hard to be fully relaxed when your admiral is standing 10 feet away. He came to the counter. He looked at Do-hyun. It was the first time they had been in the same room. Up close, Sorvin was even more imposing than his calm image. Taller, with a stillness to him that was not coldness, but weight. The kind of stillness that comes from having lived through a great many things and learned not to be moved easily. His 4 eyes took in the galley, the cups, the crew at their tables, and Do-hyun at the counter, all in the same slow sweep. Then he said, "You are smaller than I expected." "I get that a lot," Do-hyun said. Something shifted at the corner of Sorvin's mouth. Not a smile exactly. Varric mouths did not move the same way, but something in that direction. Do-hyun made 2 cups. He added honey to both. He placed them on the counter, and Sorvin picked one up with a steadiness that made even that gesture look formal, and Nara took the other and immediately wrapped both hands around it in a way that was, briefly, very human. He did not say anything for a while. He looked at the galley, at the crew still sitting at the tables, at Ruka, who had appeared from somewhere and was now sitting on top of a crate in the corner, watching everything with his bright, healthy eyes, tail moving slowly like a pendulum. "The cub looks well," Sorvin said quietly. "He's been running around since day 3, Do-hyun said. Sorvin was quiet again. Then he said, in a lower voice, "He is my sister's son. She was not able to come on this deployment. She asked me to." He stopped, looked at his cup. "To keep him safe." "You have," Do-hyun said simply. Sorvin looked at him. His 4 eyes focused fully forward. "He was sick," he said, "and our doctors said to rest. And a short pause. I did not know what to do past that. I visited him. I stood there. I had nothing to offer." Do-hyun understood this completely. That's the hard part. When someone you care about doesn't feel well, and there's nothing big you can do, you just want to do something. "And you did," Sorvin said. "I made tea," Do-hyun said. "It's a small thing." "No," Sorvin said, and his voice had a firmness to it that was not argumentative, just certain. "It was not small. The act was small. The intention was not." Do-hyun did not have a good answer for that, so he said nothing. It felt like the right choice. On the last day of the docking window, Sorvin called a full assembly. All 4 ships represented by senior officers gathered in the Endless Horizon's main hall. It was a large, sparse room used for formal occasions, with high ceilings and the fleet insignia on the far wall. Do-hyun was invited, which still felt strange. He stood near the back. Sorvin stood at the front. He spoke in Varric, at first, for the senior officers, and then switched to common tongue so Do-hyun could follow. He did not talk about the tea's compounds. He did not talk about its medical applications. He said nothing about the formal inquiry, or Gorham's report, or the engineer's synthesized blend. He talked about something else. He said that the Varric had a long tradition of strength, of endurance, of not asking for things they could manage without. He said this was good. It had kept them alive through hard things. But he said that somewhere along the way, they had confused needing warmth with being weak, and they were not the same thing. He said a human had shown him this. Not by lecturing, not by explaining, by making something warm and sitting down on the floor next to a sick cub and staying there. "The human did not fix the illness," Sorvin said. "The doctors fixed the illness. The human fixed the aloneness of it. And I ask you, when was the last time any of us did that for each other?" The room was very quiet. Do-hyun looked at the floor for a moment because something in his chest had gone tight. Sorvin looked at him across the room then. "We have a word," he said, "for warmth given without being asked." He said the word, the same one Do-hyun had heard through his door days ago. We have always had the word. We had forgotten to practice it. After the assembly ended, the crew began filtering out. Nara stopped beside Do-hyun on her way past and said quietly, without looking at him, "The Admiral does not usually say things like that." "I know," Do-hyun said. "You should feel," she paused. "There is a Varek word. It means honored in the way that is also a responsibility." "I'll try to live up to it," Do-hyun said. She nodded once and moved on. Ruka found him by the door, small and quick, and wrapped one of his tails loosely around Do-hyun's ankle, the way he had started doing in the past few days, which the cultural pamphlet said was a Varek cub's way of saying, "I know you." Do-hyun reached down and rested a hand briefly on the cub's head. Outside the hall windows, the 4 ships of the Ninth Fleet floated in the dark, engines warm, stars burning far away. In a few hours the docking window would close and they would move on, back to patrol routes and duty shifts and the long, quiet discipline of deep space. But for now, in the galley that was still faintly warm from 2 days of tea, on a warship full of soldiers who had come in with made-up symptoms and left with something real, Do-hyun stood by the window with a cub at his foot and an empty cup in his hand, and thought about his grandmother's yellow kitchen, and the kettle she always had on, and the simple, enormous truth she had known her whole life without ever needing to explain it to anyone. Some things she had always said, you do not fix.